All right, why don't we get started? I think more people will be joining us. We've got a good group assembled today, and we're looking forward to it. You're gonna see me here in a second. Hi, everybody. I'm Jim McCarthy. I'm the CEO of Gold Star and the host for today's expert chat and data reveal. As you know, we survey a large group of people in the Gold Star member base and find out how they're feeling about going to live events. So I'm going to share the new data with you. But before I get to that, I want to introduce the experts who are joining us today. It was very kind of them to take their time to answer some of our questions. And so first, he's the head of Adelman Law Group in Scottsdale, Arizona, and vice president of the Event Safety Alliance. We'll talk more about that in a minute. His practice focuses on risk management, safety and security at sports and entertainment venues, events and venues. He's often an expert witness in lawsuits arising from live events. So pursuant to a lot of the stuff that you guys were talking about and the issues that we as a community face. He's a professor at Arizona State in the Sports Law and Business program. He was the lead author of the Event Safety Alliance Reopening Guide, which many people mentioned in the Facebook group, and it's part of the reason that we asked him to join us, and he was nice enough to do it. And the upcoming Crowd Management ANSI standard. He writes the Adelman on Venues newsletter and articles for various industry publications. And I need to find out about this part, but his dream is to have a reasonable conversation with a blue man. That could mean so many different things, but nonetheless, please welcome Steve Adelman. Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, and there will be an opportunity to explain the blue man reference. It's actually an important legal concept.
Awesome. Okay. Our other guest is a guy that many of you know, especially in the music part of the industry. He has shaped youth culture for over 40 years with his award-winning expertise in the music and entertainment industry and his business and philanthropic ventures. He's best known as the creator of the Vans Warped Tour, which ran from 95 to 2019 and is one of the most socially influential music tours in history. And really it was a pioneer in integrating corporate sponsorships with the extreme lifestyle, by which I think we mean like skateboarding and, surfing and that kind of thing, which created a blueprint for sponsorship integration that you see in places everywhere. He's also a bit of a startup maven. He's been associated with St. Archer Brewery, Good Die Young, Veeps, and Villager Products. He also is a professor at the University of Southern California. He is the creator of the 320 Festival, which is a mental health and education festival with Linda Bennington, and a former TEDx Broadway speaker in 2015. Please welcome Kevin Lyman.
Okay, thank you for having me, Jim. Thank you.
Pleasure as always, Kevin.
Good to see you. Steve. So good.
Yeah, our goal with these chats is to be very responsive to the group of industry professionals that are struggling with all the challenges that the COVID pandemic has brought. And in particular, coalescing around the idea of how do we return safely to the venues? What are the things we need to think about? And there was actually a week or more back, there was a request to get more information about the Event Safety Alliance reopening guide. And so this session is really directly in response to, I knew that Kevin had been involved. We found Steve who was willing to join us to talk about it. So again, the goal of these is to give people the information they need, and so you guys represent that today, which is really good. We're evolving as time goes on what people need to know and what questions they're asking, and so we're trying to be responsive to that. So thank you guys for being part of it. All right, so I think we will start today, as usual, with the presentation of the most recent consumer sentiment data that we here at Gold Star have. And so I know some of you are just waiting with bated breath to find out the new return readiness score, and you're gonna. So bear with me as I move into full presentation mode. Oh, by the way, I should mention before I get started on all this, there is a Q&A or a chat box, or maybe both, down at the bottom of the screen. As we go along, feel free to ask questions or make comments there. Someone will be feeding the questions to me in a little while as we get to that portion of it. Steve and Kevin and I are going to be talking about this data for a little bit, and we do welcome all your questions and input. So do that by all means. If you can't find it, it's down there somewhere. It shouldn't be hard. All right, on to the consumer sentiment data. So a couple bits of background for those of you who are new to this. We set out to do a project to, in an ongoing way, gauge Gold Star consumer sentiment. And our two goals were to find out in an ongoing way how the event going public is feeling about going to events. And in particular, we focus on the frequent and semi-frequent event goers because they really are the core of our business. And then our second goal was to share this information with our partners and really the industry as a whole to better inform the return to live events. And the nature of this survey is we do it twice a month. We started in early May, we did a mid-May, we did an early June, and the next one will be obviously the mid-June survey. We've been conducting a large-scale survey of our members to ask them some key questions about how they feel about going back to live events. We do this at a large enough scale that we have responses from every age group in large enough numbers to mean something from, I think the number now is 13 major metro areas. And as I said, these are frequent event goers. In the most recent survey, 68% of the respondents said they go to live events at least once or twice a month, and some even the real lunatics are going weekly or more. So it's not the casual once a year kind of person that we're asking, because really without this group of people, the business doesn't go. And last but not least, we had, as usual, a very large number of responses. It's a broad and random survey, 3,637 respondents. So that means that we have a certain amount of comfort that this data will hold up as we extrapolate it across a larger group. All right. So Kevin, Steve, you ready for the big reveal on the main number?
Sure.
Okay, so the main number, as many of you know, we asked the question, we asked the question, how willing are you to go to live events? Actually, I'll just read it to you. Right now, describe your willingness to go out to live events where you live in general, assuming they were legal and being produced. And you have a slider bar, and it starts at 0 is not at all ready, and 100 is definitely would, am definitely ready. The overall score for the overall group is 40 this time around. I guess just reaction to that number. What do you surprise you to the plus side, to the minus side? What do you think?
Steve, I mean,
this is, for context for the rest of you, this is my third webinar this morning. For the first one, I had a brief slide deck, and I had 2 consecutive pictures. One was from Lake of the Ozarks, where there were lots of people in some body of water. And I started making fun of them and talking about how heedless they were of the risk of doing exactly the activity they were engaged in. And then, before I could seem like I was too much of a jerk, the next slide was a picture from where I am, which is Scottsdale, Arizona, over Memorial Day weekend, where people were doing the exact same stupid thing. They were all in a pool, very, very close together, hundreds of people, all heedless of the risk. So I guess my anecdotal evidence is it's a hell of a lot more than 40%. And maybe if you include, I don't know, my parents and my aunt who are elderly and like going to performing arts and opera and symphonic music, that would bring the numbers down. But what I see around me, which includes going to a drive-up EDM festival a week and a half ago, which was packed and really well run and well and enthusiastically attended, was this number looks way low to me.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, and there's also potentially a difference between what people say and what people do. This is what people say when they talk about their willingness. And it's just up a little bit. So those of you who tuned in last time, the number, well, I can just show you here. The number has been really in the same ballpark for all three surveys.
I don't know. For me, Jim, I think I looked at it as, about 2 months ago, I started thinking about this, and I said, if the country opened up tomorrow, I did say 30% of the people would go immediately. 35% would run out to the first show they could, first event they could. The next 30% would be, I would call the curious or the impatience. And we've kind of hit that impatience number, that next 30% that are like, should I go out? Should I go out? So I don't think this is about right, because I always believe that still, and later on it would have probably changed. This was about 2 months ago. I put together a little paper on this, and I said about there was going to be 30% would jump right in, 30% would start getting impatient after a certain amount of time. The next 20% were going to be like, I call them the antibodies at that point, that we're going to wait for some sort of like more scientific evidence. And then I said, there's the last 20% were going to be the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
That they were going to have to wait till there was some sure vaccine or something to allow them to go back into a venue or go back into a crowd. Yeah. So I think your numbers, we're into that next 30% phase where they're getting impatient. You're seeing what you saw, Steve, in the Lake of the Ozarks. You're seeing what's going on, that they're starting to push out and want to go be part of it again. And so I think we're in that phase right now. I mean, I think that phase could be set back right now. I think your numbers could go down next week.
I think it's possible. So the number is an average. So you ask everybody who's in the survey has a slider bar they can move from 0 to 100. Sure. And so 40 is the average, but it's not necessarily the mode. I think the two most common answers are 0 and 100, interestingly, because some people are like, no way, and other people are like, let's do it. So it ends up settling around 40. But let's break it down a little bit more, because we can slice and dice this, which is part of the point, is we want to slice and dice this in some interesting ways. And one of the things we did was we looked at it, of course, by metro. And this was another thing that this group asked for in great specificity, is like there's going to be differences from region to region in terms of the way people respond. And so once again, we see big differences, and we see some of the same trends. At the top, you can see Houston at 54. It's kind of an outlier to the high end. I will say our sample there was around 100, so it's possibly a little bit of a bigger plus minus than the other markets, but it is still the highest. There's no question about it. If you look at the very largest markets, the LA, Chicago, New York, those kinds of places, still in that low 40s range, which has been about where they've been. If everyone can, I want to make sure everyone can read this, has time. If you're looking for a specific market that your venue is in and it's not on here, it's because we're not surveying it. But what we see also is that Washington, D.C. remains the low end outlier. This has been a very robust number that we've seen with D.C. They're clearly, Boston has slid back a little bit as well, but D.C. is still well below what we're seeing overall on the downside.
Jim, not to let current events completely blow up your survey, but yeah. I mean, respectfully, the optics from DC suggests that people define event differently than your survey does.
Well, that's true. That's certainly true.
I think it very much depends on what you're talking about, what someone's motivation is, and what kind of messaging they are not getting, but what they're receiving. Because, what you've got is a bunch of metropolitan areas. Once you get outside of those metropolitan areas, I think the reaction, the risk tolerance is much higher.
That may well be true. And these are specifically chosen because of the nature of our group and sort of where the core of the audience is. But Kevin's tour, for example, went into a bunch of places that that includes none of these, or places that are much smaller. So certainly the case. We asked the question a different way. These results haven't changed that much. We asked the question, in addition to just generically going out to live entertainment events, we said, how does the size of the venue affect it? And once again, we see that the small venue number is actually the same as the overall number. So when we say, how interested are you in going out to live events? People say 40, and then we say, how about if the venue is under 250 seats, and they say 40, and that number is the same, but it drops as you increase the size of the venue. So medium venues drop down to 29, and then 5,000 plus, your sort of stadiums and big concert arenas, 22. So I don't think there's any surprise here, but that continues to be a pretty straightforward relationship. This is this actually, I will say, the differences by age is evolving in an interesting way. We've been doing this now. This is the third set of this data. And so what's interesting is that the data, when you ask that same generic question and you break it down by age group, you know, one person, you might expect that people, you know, under 35 would have a very different number from people, you know, a little bit older than that. But in point of fact, those numbers have converged. At the beginning, the first time we did it, there was a sort of a staircase from 25 and under to 35 to, you know, under 45, under 55, and the 65. But what's actually occurred is that the every age under 65 has converged toward a similar number in terms of what we're seeing in the survey. So 35 and unders in our survey are up 3, but also at 44. The entire group of 35 to 65 has the exact same number overall as 35 and unders, and then it drops, you know, rather precipitously to 31 for people in the 65 and up category.
Which I think it lends to that impatience, kind of people that are saying that they're good. As more data's come out, that high risk groups, that the groups, you know, that's the thing. You have this discussion, you know, and if you're not in prison, if you're not in a facility, a living facility, if you're not working in certain environments, the chances of getting this drop a lot, and that would probably hits those, that middle group probably starting to understand that there's a breakdown within that group of who is tolerant and who's not. And you're probably seeing them willing now to go like, okay, I probably don't fall into those high risk areas, so I could go somewhere, do something.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. That seems to be the case, and it's you know, predictable but interesting when you crosstab some of this. You know, when you crosstab the 65 and up group with the large venues, you know, which I did, the number drops all the way to 13. So there's just no, I mean, and it's interesting because for some venues this is highly relevant. I mean, you know, some concert halls reach that sort of size and have an audience that's probably close to that 65 median age, and so it's highly impactful for some organizations more than others. So yeah, let's see what else we got. Okay, this is a question we started asking last time, which is give you a chance to revise your answer to the overall willingness score if the venue adhered to strict cleaning routines and social distancing of patrons. And this is the kind of thing that, you know, Kevin, you and I were talking about before we came on the air, right? These places where they're doing it very carefully. And so what happened this time was we saw the number climb from 40 to 50 when people were given a chance to make the assumption that venues were handling it like this. But still, I mean, 50 is still sort of right in the middle, I guess. That's I don't know. The number's actually changing, which is good, I guess.
It's still not to that point of the last 14% that all our profits made on in our business. So we still got a way to go. You know, if we go back to the traditional business model, which I think will be broken and the model will have to be rebuilt. So these numbers are important to understand as an overall business because it's not going back. So the numbers the whole dynamic financials of this business are going to have to change because the average festival, the last 14% is the profit.
Touring. Where is the break-even point for?
Well, you know, you look at festivals, the profit margin usually is at the last 14%. On large tours, you're looking at that 14 to 20%. So until we can kind of tap into those worlds, you couldn't go back to an old model like we used to have, even though there's been a lot of great talk, and I think it's really important talk, going back to door deals and the type of things we're talking about, reduced, and Steve did so much work on this, you know, that people are going to have to cut their productions down because you're not going to be able to load in these massive productions in short time. So if everyone can get on the same page, and that's going to be the hardest problem, it's going to take everyone strategically trying to figure out how to put anything back on the road. Because unless we can get that last 14 to 20% of the people back in the venues, we're going to be working off this 50% or 60% number when people start thinking about going back on and doing shows. So it's very complicated. And, you know, I know that, you know, you put yourself in anyone's shoes and then all of a sudden it opens up more cans of worms that you put yourself in anyone's shoes and you go, wow, we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's see. We asked a question slightly different way. We said, describe your willingness to go out to live events where you live in venues or locations that are outdoors, like gardens and zoos, or that don't require patrons to be seated near each other, like museums and aquariums. And that number is actually a more optimistic number, and it climbed again to 58. In the last survey, it was 55. Now it's 58. Again, what's interesting here is that you might think that age would skew it heavily. Again, everybody under the age of 65 is centering around this sort of 58, 60, 61 sort of number. And then I think under 65, I'm sorry, over 65 was 50 or 51. So there's certainly more optimism here. Does that make sense to you guys?
Frankly, I don't think there's any reason why museums and aquariums couldn't reopen today. They have every advantage other than they're indoors, most of them.
Yeah.
But social distancing is relatively easy to maintain. They can enforce face coverings if they choose to do that. And I understand that's a whole, cultural issue that some people are just not going to want to deal with. But there's no single attraction to cause crowd density to become excessive. Museums and aquariums, auto shows, other things like that where there's no crowd density problem, yeah, they should reopen. And I think that's going to, because places will reopen, it's going to push these numbers up because they will be an opportunity for people to get out while you can't go to, the symphony or the opera or Coachella or, an NFL game, but you can do some things.
Yeah.
And I think the ability to do things is going to push these numbers up.
Right, absolutely. We're going to talk about the Event Safety Alliance reopening guide and liability in general. Just want to share, this is always the last slide just to make everybody feel a little better, which is how much are you looking forward to being able to go to live events, sports, entertainment, and arts again in the future? Once again, we have this nice juicy 83 number, which is really good. So I just put that there so all of us can feel a little bit better that the consumers still love us. They still want to do it. And so that is it for this period's data. Of course, we're going to do another set of data for the middle of June as well. All right, very good. Awesome. So I want to invite everybody in the chat in the room to feel free to ask us questions or chat with us below, and we'll pick up on those things. But let's just start by saying thank you guys for going through that with me. The topic really that we got from the crowd was from the group was let's talk about things like liability, and let's talk about things like the guidelines that you Steve were very instrumental in creating, and Kevin, you also were involved. So what can you tell people? What should you think is the most important thing for them to know about those guidelines, and what they should be thinking about in terms of reopening?
Read it. It's a free download, eventsafetyalliance.org. The Event Safety Alliance reopening guide is free. Before I started my Olympic webinar challenge this morning, I was working on the French translation of the guide, which is finished, and the Chinese translation, which is just about finished. If you're still waiting for the Polish, Greek, or Korean versions, you have to wait a little longer.
Now, Steve, are you doing all this translation personally? Are you?
Oh, God, no. I can read enough French to know, we had to change a few French-Canadian idioms so that they would be French. But other than that, no. But the Event Safety Alliance reopening guide, it's really granular guidance. I'm not going to summarize it today. It came out a month ago. If you don't have it right now, essentially, what the hell's wrong with you?
And someone is asking, can we put the link? We'll absolutely put the link in the chat, and we'll share it afterwards as well, of course.
Yeah. What I will say about the reopening guide is, and again, this is a little contrarian based on the survey data that you just showed, is we built the guide with an assumption. And the assumption was if event professionals ask in the right way and they message in the right way, which we describe, then they can increase worker and patron compliance with the only three things they're being asked to do: maintain 6 feet of social distance, wear face covering, wash your hands. We only ask people to do 3 things. 3, that's all. But at least what I see is 3 apparently is at least 1 too many and maybe 2 too many. Face covering, I mean, again, I live in one of the places that you didn't survey, but the Phoenix area is big and relatively sophisticated, and yet face covering in any place other than my local Costco, not common. And even my elderly neighbors they were literally threatening a mutiny if our community pool wasn't opened. And when our governor said, we don't have any testing here in Arizona, we are 50 out of 50 in the nation, so we're gonna hold back for another 2 weeks. And some of my elderly neighbors were literally talking about climbing the pool fence. So the assumption, and I'm not exaggerating, the assumption that we built into the Event Safety Alliance reopening guide is that there would be some compliance, and I think that is turning out to be wrong. I think that there is a much higher risk tolerance. Really, it's not tolerance, it's risk indifference. It's the COVID-19 version of NIMBY, not in my backyard. People just do not believe that COVID-19 is going to affect them. And so does that infuriate me? Yes, it does. Does it frustrate me on a societal level? Absolutely. From an event perspective, I guess that's good news, because when sober event professionals do what we recommend and reopen their doors as safely as one can during a pandemic, I think there's going to be a much higher number of people willing to walk in the door and sit relatively close to other people than we, the Event Safety Alliance, anticipated. We thought that only the small venues would be able to reopen soon, and I think that's just not going to be true. I think it's not going to be small numbers. I think larger spaces can reopen so long as they're not larger and densely packed. Density is the problem, not size.
Yeah.
I guess what I see, and then I'll shut up, is people are much less concerned about size than we expected.
Yeah.
And, that's good news for our industry, even if it's bad news for public health.
Yeah, Coriana, who is with us as a participant today, agrees with you. She has a venue in Arizona and is concerned about asking people to wear face masks. That may be a regional thing, or in some parts of the country more than others, but I don't know. I mean, actually, I'm curious. To the people listening, all of you, in the chat, real quick, if you could just say, I don't know, you could just say yes, no, or somewhat. How willing would you be to require face coverings in your venue? Just type it in. Make sure it goes to all panelists and attendees. So if you're willing, say yes. If you're not willing, say no. If you're somewhere in between, say somewhat or 50-50. So I'm getting a lot of yeses, a lot of people. Gosh, I haven't seen any no's so far.
There's one 50-50.
One 50-50. One mid-level, somewhat, yes. Willing but concerned about the usher staff having to enforce it. This is a serious issue, right? I mean, yes, in a mid-sized Chicago theater, would be willing, but our rural community would have a backlash. Willing to request, but not looking forward to the staff. So what about this? I mean, this goes to the issues of things like liability and legality, right? The staff that's going to be required to implement this type of thing, right? Like, this is a real challenge. This is not a trivial challenge by any means.
No, this is real. There is serious pushback, and why wouldn't there be? I mean, look at what our leaders are conveying to us. We don't have to go right to the top. In Texas, where magically 50% capacity is safe, I don't know of any epidemiologists who agree with that, but that's the governor's directive. But
Right.
they immediately undermine their own initial guidance before the 50%. When somebody was just completely defying the governor's reopening guidance, and both the governor and lieutenant governor agreed to pay her fine when she violated the governor's directive. So why wouldn't people be defiant? Why wouldn't we expect them to refuse to wear face coverings? Look at all the knucklehead advice and bad role modeling they're getting. It's not just here in Arizona. We happen to be, on an island of stupid, but we are far from the only island. Maybe this is sort of an archipelago of stupid.
That sounds like a Henry Miller book or something. There's some questions I want to get in here, and I want to hear both of your perspectives on this. There's a cluster of questions that are similar. By the way, we unfortunately can never get to everybody's questions, but we'll try to hit the ones that seem related. So, Ed asks, if we open with all the precautions and we stringently manage them, and somebody gets the virus, what kind of liability do we have? That I think is sort of the core of the question. And there's a lot of sort of peel off questions from that. But you guys are both at least somewhat to greatly schooled in this question. What's the overall take that people need to know about that?
Well, Jim, I would say that and Steve's comes from a law back, but I come from like this skateboarding world, and I related to the skateboarding world. In California, we had multiple skateboard parks. We had skateboard parks everywhere. People went skating, they got hurt. They sued the skate parks. Skate parks were they were ripped up, the cities tore them all down. Finally, they wrote some legislation that said, if you bring a skateboard, it is an assumed risk, okay? If you skate at this park and it's well maintained, you are assuming that you might be skating. It's similar to what happened with the ski industry. You couldn't just go around suing everyone for that. I think there's going to have to be some sort of written in waiver per state, probably, Steve, that you cannot sue a venue if they're following whatever guidelines are set up. As a patron, you are assuming some sort of risk to go to that venue at this point.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist at this point. That I know of, Steve.
So Samuel asks, in the absence of that, would you make event patrons sign a waiver, or is there any kind of agreement that can be established upon purchase of a ticket that either says they'll follow the rules, or if they don't, then I don't know. Is there a hack around the absence of those laws?
Look, Steve, I'll jump in a second, but I'd like to say, I put on shows, and my specialty was in creating human stew. I call it human stew. I didn't do shows.
Opposite of social distancing.
Opposite of social distancing. I was looking at just, and I looked at it, and we would constantly, and I'm still going through lawsuits of people that say, I was crowd surfing and I was dropped. Okay. Even though we would put up signs, and I got a lot of crap for it, like putting up signs like crowd surfing is a dangerous activity. Don't do it. Your mom sues us. We get shut down. Until we have some real thing, I don't think Steve, you can say signing a waiver at the door would be problematic too, to get large audiences in. And if they get lost, or were someone inebriated when they signed it and didn't know what they were signing. So I think it has to be a blanket legislation that says, if you go to gatherings, you are now, assuming some risk. There is a risk out there, whatever that is. Steve, I'm done. Okay, go ahead.
Kevin, I don't know if this is going to surprise you. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I think waivers of liability in this case are not the answer. And the reason they're not the answer is exactly the reason, Kevin, that you just said. They are not enforced by courts. And particularly with COVID-19, nobody really understands the risk, so we can't assume it. CDC is changing their guidance from one week to the next. So, you can have your local lawyer write up a waiver of liability. They're not hard. We roll out of bed in the morning doing that.
Yeah.
But it won't be enforceable. Period. So there's no hack there. But Kevin raises exactly the right solution, which is on a state-by-state level. It's not going to come from Congress, because nothing useful is coming from Congress right now. on a state-by-state level, there needs to be a system by which if a venue does, certain state vetted and approved health and safety measures, then the state will issue some kind of certification, which if someone claims that they contracted COVID-19 by going to an event, the venue then would produce its sweep log, its training material, its staffing for that week to say, look, we complied with the training that you state already approved, and so we now would like to invoke the protections that the state you have guaranteed us. And at that point, the state, some clerk in some windowless office somewhere would issue a 2-page motion to dismiss, which then gets emailed to the organizer, to Kevin or somebody else. And then Kevin, without even having to hire a lawyer, can, on a pro se basis, sign his name at the bottom of this 2-page motion to dismiss, file it off to the court, and the judge would say, well, this venue, this event, fully complied with the state's regulatory scheme for health and safety and the public interest. And so we're going to grant this motion to dismiss. This lawsuit is done. And that's the way it needs to work. Yeah. And the reason it needs to work that way is not that the lawsuits, the personal injury lawsuits that people are worried about, not that they're going to win, because they're not. They're going to lose. I can explain why, but that involves more law. Yeah. But the real problem is in the next insurance policy period after the current one ends, people are not going to have pandemic coverage anymore. It will be specifically excluded from future insurance policies. Do you need pandemic coverage to pay settlements? No, you don't, because you're not going to lose these lawsuits. Do you need pandemic coverage to pay the defense lawyer? Yes, you do. Because even lawsuits that are losers don't lose on their own. They need a lawyer to defend them right now. And once the current insurance policy period ends, you, venue professionals, event promoters, and whoever else is on this webinar, that money is going to come out of your pocket unless there is what Kevin correctly suggests is the solution, which is on a state-by-state level. They say, in the interest of public health and public safety, we're requiring certain particular measures, and we're going to vet those. And in the interest of the economics and future culture of our state, we're going to protect our local industry by lifting from them the economic burden of non-meritorious lawsuits and the defense costs that you're going to have to pay unless we provide some help.
Yeah. And I see that someone asked a question here, Jim. Michael said some venues have fine print on the back of tickets that state that the holder's presence at the event or concert, they're entering at their own risk. Those never hold up. Those are worth nothing, to be honest.
That is exactly right.
Those are worth nothing.
Kevin, you're good on this law stuff. I like it.
Trust me, 40 years of throwing very large gatherings. I've seen everything thrown at me at one point or another, I think,
And encouraging teenagers to smash into each other at high speed in the hot sun. So it's interesting to hear that there's a subtlety here that you're pointing out, Steve, which is you shouldn't so much worry about losing the suit as it is just the cost of defending these suits. Can you give us like 20 seconds on why you probably won't lose the suit if it goes forward?
It's more than 20 seconds. It'll be a minute.
A minute. We can live with that.
Time me. I'm going to teach you some law right now. So if you're watching this webinar and want to have some law, get ready to take your notes. 3, 2, 1, go. Personal injury lawsuits are torts. There are 4 elements to a tort. Ready? They are duty, breach, causation, and harm, damages. The reason you don't have to worry about losing a personal injury suit arising from COVID-19 has to do with both breach and most particularly causation, proximate cause. You don't have to worry about losing a tort claim arising from COVID-19 because no plaintiff will be able to prove proximate cause. Let's unpack that. When somebody goes to your event, whatever your event is, lots of other things will already be reopened. Supermarkets, big box retail stores. I watched soccer practice yesterday in my community. Lots of stuff is reopened, which means people are out and about in the world. They're breathing other people's aerosolized germs. They are interacting with lots of other people in lots of spaces. COVID-19 has a 2-week incubation period. There is no way that someone who goes to a show on a Saturday, 2 weeks later is going to be able to say, oh, unlike when I went to, Target or Walmart or, my local supermarket or, my friend's house or any place else, unlike all those other places, the only place where I contracted COVID-19 was your event. That's never going to work. And the reason it's never going to work is COVID-19 doesn't have a signature that is readily identifiable. About a third of all people who are infected, actively infected, will be completely asymptomatic. So you could do everything right, and still a third of the people walking around could be infectious carriers. And even for people who do show symptoms, will be most infectious before they show symptoms. So proving proximate cause is not going to work because lots of other places will be reopened, and proving breach won't work because you could do everything right and still a significant minority of people at your venue might be asymptomatic carriers. That's why you don't have to worry about losing a lawsuit, because 2 of the 4 required elements in plaintiff's burden of proof will be virtually impossible to ever prove.
So in the absence of, so we don't have to worry about that. We do have to worry about having insurance that allows us to pay the attorneys who deal with that. What should, and since our community doesn't necessarily drive the legislative agenda, we could influence it maybe, but in the absence of the state legislation to create a standard that they can meet, what should they do in this area? Well, now and longer term.
Well, and when Steve said about the insurance, I mean, you have to realize on January 26th, Peter Tempkins, who insures many, as was the first festival he ever insured, pretty much. January 26th, the insurance companies and the underwriters pretty much said that's it. No, you could not get insurance for pandemic or contagious disease at that point. They just put a blanket on it, hold on January 26th. So it's going back that far. So until all this happens, I mean, that's going to have to be, a lot of discussion here, because you will never be able to insure this. It will be excluded forever.
Yep. Again, I completely agree. And, Kevin, I too, rely on Peter Tempkins' judgment. Peter Tempkins, by the way, is with Hub International. So if you want a really knowledgeable insurance guy, Peter Tempkins, based in Nashville.
Yeah.
I mean, there will not be insurance coverage for infectious disease or pandemic for the foreseeable future. We're talking about years. So you will be naked. You will not have coverage to pay for settlements, which again, you won't need, but for defense, which you will need, that's just not going to be a thing. So I guess, Jim, my answer to your question is band together. There are groups that are already working on legislation, and it's going to be incumbent upon each of you to find those groups. In the world of independent nightclubs, there is the, NEVA, it's the National Independent Venue Association. The Event Safety Alliance doesn't lobby, but we have a lot of smart friends who are, and I'm involved in some state efforts, so you can reach out to me and I can tell you if your state is one of them. But this is a thing that's going to require collective political action. So, not like you need yet another reminder to vote, but here's another reminder, vote. And in the meantime, while you're figuring out what your mail-in registration process is, talk to your friends. Kevin obviously is very smart about this. I have some influence also. Reach out to us. We would be glad to help.
Yeah, that's excellent. I want to cover a couple more of the questions here. Daryl has a question for you, Kevin. You mentioned and you touched on the idea that things are going to change in the industry, even as this goes forward. What do you foresee artists doing after the pandemic? Everybody wants to tour, agents want their cut. Will larger national acts be willing to play smaller theaters over a few nights, or 2 shows per night, or take cuts in pay to play smaller venues?
I think I hate to say, but the kind of hybrid of all.
Yeah.
But really what I'm focusing on is the niche technology things that were kind of on the fringes, because when you really tore it apart and talking to manager and just, my independent talking to too many people when this all happened, managers became so dependent on live events. 65 to 70% of all income for artists were coming from touring. So when this completely rug got pulled out and everything shut down, everyone got the wind knocked out of them for a few weeks. It was just like, whoa, I'm pulling down tours, I'm doing this. But then they started to understand these other things like Topeka Live, Veeps, Cameo, companies that I've kind of been in, and I'm not pitching things that I'm involved in, but things that were kind of sitting there that no one had time to talk to because they were so busy on working on their next tour deals. I think the national tour deals are going to go away for a long time. I think a lot of different things are going to change. So those companies right now that were prime and ready with updated technology and availability, everyone started calling them and saying, wait, what can you do? They've carved out great things. So I think there's going to be a shift, and some of those companies will survive and prosper after all this. That artists are going to look at it and go, you know what, a properly done show that I'm streaming and very creative, I may be able to generate some revenue so I don't have to go on the road so soon. Or I might not have to go on the road for 2 weeks a year, that I can supplement that income, which will help the whole mental health situation of our industry, because we need to get, be home more often. So I think there's going to be a lot of little opportunities. So a lot of the things with the students I'm working with and different things is, how are we going to look after all this? So there's going to be, I think, a carve out where I don't know if 10% of the people are ever going to go back to concerts. They're going to want to digest things in a different way. New technologies might be their way. But I'm also looking at, we're going to go back to the door deals where we're going to have to decide that we have to earn our money to go out. And what does that affect?
You give people, just in case there's people who don't know the terminology, because they're not as popular as they used to be. What's a door deal?
Well, I was the largest door deal left, I think, well, other than maybe Jimmy Buffett. But Warped Tour never took a guarantee. I was on a percentage of the door. So we got a good percentage because we were willing to assume the risks. The artists, it all got skewed. The Live Nation was taking all the risks. The artists were taking very little risk. So now when someone like Michael Rapito comes up and says, we're going back to door deals, and we're going back to people we're going to give them a good percentage of the money, or we're going to give them enough money to be on tour, which I think is going to be a whole new cottage industry of accountants. This cottage industry of accountants, because if I'm a tour manager or a manager, I'm going to have to submit my tour budget. It costs me X amount to bring the production, the crew, the transportation. Live Nation's going to have to submit an operating budget to run their venues, not pad it like a house nut kind of situation. There'll have to be an agreement that maybe this show is going to, I'm just rough number, is going to cost $100,000 to put on. The band's going to get $30,000 bringing the show, cost 70, whatever, 100 grand. Then it becomes a split after that point. 85-15 to the artist, or however they'll figure this out. We will go back to that model. So all of a sudden, a little bit, the bands are going to have to market themselves a little more. They're going to have faith that they can actually sell those tickets because they're not being handed this giant guarantee. So there's going to be marketing jobs out there. There's going to be accounting jobs to be like independent auditor of these tours. So I think what it will do is and then production wise, people are going to be a lot smarter in the way that they production budgets are going to go down. We're simplifying shows, I think, will be a big thing, because it goes to the Event Safety Alliance that it's going to take a lot longer to load in shows. A typical arena show right now could take 2 to 3 days to load in based on some of these new guidelines. So you're going to bring less trucks, you're going to bring less buses, the costs are going to go down overall because people aren't going to spend so much, and then there'll be money to split at the top. So that's basically a 1 month lesson in how the new business that I've been thinking about of how this is all going to work. So there's going to a lot of people, it's going to be a new business. It's, you know, if I was 27 years old again, I'd be stoked. I'd be like, okay,
it's an open door. It's an open door that was glued and nailed shut previously.
You know, there's going
to be a configuration of in my view, this is a healthier way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, in the long, it will. It all got, the whole system was skewed the wrong way. It was broken, technically, and that's why it folded so quickly, and that's why there was no security. You know, when you have to appeal to your stock shareholders, and it was sad. AEG held on as long as possible yesterday. They loved their employees, but they had to make those hard decisions within the last 48 hours.
Yeah.
So the whole business is probably, it's knocked everyone off their high horses, bottom line.
You know, and
everyone's equal. So that independent venue operators, and I was talking to people there, and they go, Kevin, you're thinking too far down the road, 2 years. You're thinking like a year or two. We're trying to get to next month. And I'm going, no, this is a great time to reinvent yourselves as a strong organization that will have clout in a different way once this gets through this. And if you could think 2 years down the road, when we do have a vaccine, I believe, I'm a vaccine type person, this business could be really, it's going to be a lot more even playing field. So
I hope you're right. I think there's an opportunity that didn't exist before this for something like that to emerge. So that's a hopeful note. We're gonna close now, but I want to, Steve, anything you'd just like to leave us in passing before we go?
I'm going to second Kevin's optimism. You know, I think of this like a forest fire. It's really bad when it's going on, but it clears a lot of space for new things. And I think for people who are not so deeply wedded to what came before the first week of March, this is going to be a time that maximizes creative thinking and, you know, ultimately is going to help our industry grow. It's just going to be really painful getting to that point. But, you know, my goodness, for people who are able to color outside the lines, this is our moment. You know, use it productively.
Absolutely.
Hey, Jim, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
This could be a great moment in time because I put 25 cents on every one of my tickets since I was the inception of my festivals that I donated to people like Music Cares. I've been advocating that we as an industry put 25 cents on every ticket that went into a fund to support our crew members and our roadies and our technicians and all those people. I've been screaming about it. It was blocked by the agents, to be honest. It was blocked by the agents. If we had put 25 cents in, and I've been around now, 40 years, but I've been doing it for 25 years, we would have had a fund so large that we didn't need our roadies and our crew people to be standing in food lines right now and completely desperate and can't pay their rent. We would have had a fund that would have been able to self-support our own industry. And we're going to have to look out for this.
And that applies in the performing arts and theater too. I know there's a lot of theater and performing arts people on this as well. And everything that's been said about music translates roughly onto the theater side, and even more. There's a lot of pain out there in every genre, not just music, at the crew level, at the staff level. And boy, oh boy, Kevin, I think you've really hit on something there. I'd love to see if anybody in the Show Up group picks up on this, that why not? Why not have something that's just built in as a rainy day fund that's generated by sales when things are sunny, right? I mean, like, we could have had that. It's sort of a tragedy now that you mention it, that it isn't sitting there for what is, of course, a tremendously rainy day. So I love that idea. I hope other people do. We're gonna wrap up because we're just a few minutes over our time, but there's been such a good conversation. Do go to the Show Up Facebook group, where this group is very active. This idea came up to talk about the Event Safety Alliance Reopening Guide through the Show Up group. So keep bringing ideas up there. We are going to share all the resources that came in that were mentioned during this conversation with you on email, and I'm sure on Facebook as well. I will also do a brief run through of the data once again on video for you to watch later. And I guess last but not least, by any means, Kevin and Steve, thanks so much for helping us today.
Thank you very much.
Really clarified.
Good seeing you guys. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Just real quick, we will be back on June 24th, same time. and I'll have fresh data. And we have not yet announced our guests, but I'd love to know what you guys would like to learn more about, because that is the goal of this. So thank you, everybody. You've all stuck with us through the entire thing, which I really appreciate. Hope you got something out of it. Take care of yourselves. Let's lean into this future that Kevin and Steve are so optimistic about, and I share their optimism. We can make something better than we started with. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Crachez-vous dessus, il est encore temps.